Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Co-op. Just welcome this morning. You know, I am in Tucson, Arizona today, where the weather in the daytime gets 70 and 80 degrees, and at night is 50 to 60 degrees. It feels real cold at night, even at 50, because it's so high in the daytime. And our guests today, we have two guests, Kevin O'Brien and Matthew Epperson. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Vernon.
Good morning, Vernon.
Good morning. You know, we're here to talk about Everything Co-op's holiday list, and you are the first product that we're talking about. We have a total of 15 products and services on our holiday list. And this is a mug. It says, on the mug, it says, there's a co-op for that. But before we get into the mug, Kevin, I'd like to talk to you. You're the founder and general manager of Worx Printing. That's WORX, Worx Printing. How did you get into this business? In particular, how did you get into co-ops?
Do I have to fit that in the hour?
Okay. All right. Take 5 minutes. You had plenty of time.
The short version is I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up a big fan of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, specifically because of their social justice angle. And really the first place I ever heard of solidarity ratio, you know, referencing Mondragon's executive solidarity ratio and Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield both took less as executives than they could have. And I think they proselytized a 6-to-1 ratio at a time when executive salaries were going through the roof, and globalization was the roots of globalization were really starting.
Wait. So what that means is that Ben and Jerry, the owners, the managers, the most they could make is 6 times what the least person made?
Yep.
When 6-to-1?
Yep.
And sometimes in American corporations, that may be 400-to-1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
pretty stunning. But because I grew up and they were kind of what I first saw as the high bar of business people, I actually went into another industry. I went into the apparel industry out of college, and I went in because I was also a child of the NAFTA in its first generation. And there was a very public story in 1996. Kathy Lee Gifford had a bully pulpit on the Regis and Kathy Lee television show, and she was super popular. And she was the first celebrity endorsed apparel line, which happened to be sold at Walmart. Oddly, which was famous for its USA-made goods, was found to be using child labor in El Salvador. And Charles Kernigan was the person who exposed this, brought it to attention at a time when everyone was very interested in how are we going to outsource jobs from the U.S. And I was fascinated by it. I was just out of college. I was fascinated by trade and the rising Clinton administration, how we were going to deal with this as a society. Because my grandmother was a sewer. You know, I grew up with somebody who sewed my clothes for me, and I knew worked in a factory somewhere at some point. But when I got the chance, I moved to the garment center, and I thought that I was going there, you know, to help save the American sewing manufacturing industry. And what I was really doing was kind of running into a burning building, and just collapsing, and everything that I saw was kind of the decimation of an industry in Metro New York City, which still has an industry, but it's certainly a shadow of what it was, and I was watching it crumble, and pretty sad, to work with apparel companies around the country and watch them go out of business. And the loss was pretty painful. I eventually wanted out of the industry. I thought that American-made goods just weren't going to make it, because the percentages had fallen so far, from 100% when I was entering grade school to 50% when I graduated college to under 5% at the turn of the century. So it didn't look good. And
so how did all of this get you to co-ops?
Well, oddly, it was that moment in time. So I was quite literally seeking employment in another industry. I had accumulated all this knowledge and I was capable of doing domestic work, but it didn't seem to me that there was going to be an industry. And at that exact moment in time, Ben and Jerry had a hostile takeover of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Unilever and Haagen-Dazs kind of duked out who was going to get to own Ben and Jerry's. And the very first project that Ben chose to work on outside of Ben and Jerry's, I always felt was kind of in response to the corporate maneuvering that these companies were doing to steal his company from him. And that was a Mondragon-inspired worker-owned union co-op called Sweatex. And Ben was the right person in the right place at the right time to rise up this concept. And most of the media outlets were very interested to find out what, the ice cream man was going to do after Ben and Jerry's. And he did the traditional press junket. I heard him on NPR talking about it. But most of the world saw him on the Oprah Winfrey Show or, high profile media outlets like that. And he and his team, I kind of refer to as Burlington because that's where they're all from, Burlington, Vermont, were trying to cobble together an apparel manufacturing facility in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles. And the whole idea behind it was to make good clothes in a good shop here in the United States using union labor and have it be cooperatively owned. And there weren't a lot of models to follow with that, but I think they reached back in their pocket of, well, how did Mondragon do what Mondragon did? And yeah, that's the shortest version of the story I can tell.
Okay.
How I got involved.
It's extremely interesting that I did not know this story. So Matthew, would you tell us, how did you get involved in co-ops?
Sure. Yeah, happy to, Vernon. So, yeah, my journey into co-ops was largely through just happening to land in a college town where there was a grocery co-op here in my area. And, it's a little bit of a funny story for me that...
Where are you?
Oh, yeah. I'm in Athens, Georgia. Yeah,
okay.
So college town, Athens, Georgia, I like to say home of B-52s and REM. A lot of people know us for our football. It's also true. It's also very enjoyable and good, but I think of us as a music town. And yeah, it was landing here for my undergraduate that, I was on campus and I was working for actually our dining services, one of the dining halls for undergrads. And one of my coworkers suggested that there was a weird grocery store over on Prince Avenue that I might really like. And it turns out that was the food co-op. And so that was the initial connection for me was, just on a whim, going into the grocery co-op. And, at the time we were very much like a member-led grocery co-op. So sort of, I since came to understand sort of that 70s model grocery cooperative where it was very member labor driven. And so that was really the introduction for me. It was like becoming a member owner, And back then, we were quite member operated, even though we were consumer owned. So, members were working the cash registers, they were stocking the shelves, they were, washing the floors. And then I became the coordinator of that whole program. And that's actually how I became an educator in this space, was through orienting new people who were always coming through the revolving door of, like, we've always got new students, retirees for the most part. You had to have at least a little bit of spare time. Most people gave 4 hours a week. A little bit in that model of Park Slope, I later came to understand, so different in many ways from Park Slope. I don't want to confuse people. Very small, kind of like the size of a house grocery store. But that was, my introduction was through the grocery co-op space.
And Park Slope is in New York, and Park Slope may not be bigger. I've not visited it yet, but it's a smaller place. But they say that the aisles are packed, and
Right.
people they work there. You have to work there. You have to put that 4 hours in.
Absolutely. Yep. And they've just gone through their first general manager. Well, I don't know if it's the first, but they've gone recently through a general manager transition. And I believe it was in the New York Times. So they've definitely, and, I've heard them talked about on the Daily Show, quite, publicly known, maybe the most famous grocery co-op, I would say.
Okay. I have not heard it mentioned on the Daily Show, and I like the Daily Show too. But okay, it's not a co-op. Kevin, where are you now? What part of the world are you in?
Worx and myself are based in Worcester, Massachusetts.
So you're in the Northeast, and Matthew is in the South. Is that called North-South? Southeast. And right now, I'm mainly in D.C., but right now I'm in the Southwest in Tucson. So co-ops are all over the U.S. Matter of fact, they're all over the world. So first Matthew, you nominated this mug. There's a co-op for that. Why did you do that? To be in this year's holiday list?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give a quick bit of context to this, because when I saw that you all put out the call for nominations, I got very excited because I've actually got a little bit of history with creating holiday lists for co-ops. So I was the founder of the Georgia Co-op Development Center back in 2017, and actually even by 2018, I was creating a co-op holiday market for our local area. It was a very similar concept, but if you just took that guide and put it into a physical market in our area, Northeast Georgia, we did that at a local brewery back in 2018. And then from there, I also started doing it on our website and actually realized it's still online. I haven't done it for a few years, but back in 2021, I compiled an online list as well. So I'm very familiar with this, idea, and I'm very excited about encouraging folks to think about the holidays in particular, where we're already doing this shopping anyway, right? So why don't we just use the P6, cooperation among cooperatives, Principle 6, to help guide us in that area. So, just already very excited about it. And, when I started thinking about this nomination in particular, because of my excitement, I probably made 6 different nominations, but I'm so glad this one got picked. Because for a few different reasons, so I'm also involved in a network called Cooperation Worx. And so I found out about this mug because the Northwestern Cooperative Development Center has a shop through Worx Printing Cooperative, which, Kevin could talk about the innovation that allowed them to create these custom shops for folks on demand. But so Northwest Cooperative Development Center receives the benefit of the purchases of these mugs. But just to get it very brass tacks about my excitement about it, being in the South, this is what we call a Waffle House mug. So it's like that kind of thick mug design that I really love anyway. Just stylistically, it's just very satisfying. I actually have it in my hand right now. Your listeners can't see me do this, but it's in my hand right now. So it's a very pleasing mug to hold. I love the design. I love the concept as well. That's probably honestly the biggest thing. There's a co-op for that. Being this idea, it's a play. So John McNamara, we're going to credit with, I think, coming up. I don't know if he came up with the idea, but, I think probably what John was thinking along the lines of people typically say there's an app for that, right? And it kind of became assumed that there's going to be app solutions for everything in the world. Well, that's probably not necessarily true, but it's probably even more accurate to say there's a co-op for that because, communities face so many different challenges and there's always going to be some kind of a co-op solution. The communities can rally around. We can get into what all that means.
So is that cup hold about a cup and a half of coffee or tea when you say it's a mug? or 2 cups?
Something like that. Yeah, I think these are usually 12 ounces, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So, Kevin, can you tell us how you got to produce this cup in Worx Printing?
Sure. So Worx Printing is a fairly unique print shop, and I always say we're as much a logistics shop as we are a print shop. We might as well be the Worx Logistics Cooperative, mostly because when I started in the industry, it was so much more common that print shops would produce a lot of stuff, big boxes of stuff, and ship it to an organization's home office, or ship it to their warehouse, or ship it somewhere. But that was the involvement that a print shop had in the supply chain, was to source a good like this mug, get it in-house, print it, finish it, and then ship it in bulk to a warehouse. We founded Worx on the principle that that wasn't going to last in the industry. That the industry was morphing into more of a print-on-demand system, where people really don't want boxes shipped to them. They just want mugs to get to where their final resting place is meant to be, like into Matthew's hands. Ultimately, that's where John and the development center wanted a mug to get to, is to a supporter who believed in the message and the cause. So if you're in the co-op world or the labor world, we're a union co-op, just like SweatX, Mondragon inspired union cooperative. Then if you're in the labor movement or the cooperative movement and you want to practice solidarity purchasing, Principle 6 and the 7 cooperative principles, and union co-ops have 10 principles, so it's actually Principle 7. But if you want to support a cooperative and you want to make merchandise and you don't want big boxes of merchandise shipped to your location, you want everything dispersed, then you'll probably find Worx Printing, because we're the only cooperative I'm aware of in this space, and it was a great show of solidarity, because we're a union co-op, and maybe because of our history with domestic manufacturing. Worx is also unique in that we're a USA only shop, so we don't use any blank goods that are manufactured overseas. We only source locally in the United States. So this mug in particular happens to be made oddly in Tucson, Arizona, where you happen to be today. And all the raw materials, ingredients that go into the ceramic are sourced in the United States. It's truly a locally made mug for you, and a made in USA mug for all the rest of us who are looking to support that. The choice of sourcing on our behalf and the choice of choosing us as a vendor on the development center's behalf is how I got involved. And what we do is help reproduce a message. In this case, I think we might have had some art involvement in the message, and we might have helped with the design a little bit as well. But that was the goal of John and the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, was to make something that could help increase the visibility of this notion that there's a co-op for that.
Okay, so co-ops, matter of fact, we've been on the air now for 11 years. That first month in October of our first show, there was a gentleman from Senegal, and Papa Sin is his name. He said that co-ops are developed to solve community problems. He said, if there's no community problem, there's no need for a co-op. Well, I don't know any community that doesn't have problems. And this mug suggests that there's a co-op for that, which means for any problem that one has, then you can create a co-op to solve that problem. I like the message a lot. Do you know if John McNamara created the slogan?
I honestly don't know the origin of the story, but I do think Matt's probably right in that it's a common phrase to say there's an app for that. You know, with the development of personal handheld technologies, there is an app for that. I'm not sure there's an app for developing a co-op, though. It's a little more complex.
Not yet.
And yet, it is true that a cooperative can be developed for almost any reason. You know, we always think in the United States that a business is supposed to solve a problem, and there's a market opportunity for that business to solve a problem. But we also know that there are nonprofits and 501c organizations who are seen as charitable organizations or aren't in the business of, you know, making money, who try to also solve problems. I think quite often those problems are created by the business solutions to other problems, and the inequity that can occur from it. But somewhere in between the two is this opportunity to use the cooperative structure to provide solutions in a community that aren't for shareholder benefit, they're for stakeholder benefit, much more like the 501c community. And a cooperative is a great infrastructure for that. It's a great infrastructure for keeping dollars in the community. It's a great infrastructure for keeping worker ownership. And Matt, I'm sure you could speak deeper to all the benefits that a cooperative can bring to a solution.
But before you do that, Matthew, I want you to talk more about the benefits that co-ops bring to a community. Kevin, if somebody like me wants to get this mug, and I want to get this mug, I guess since I'm in Tucson, I can walk over to the manufacturing plant to get it. But how does one order this? How does one get the mug, one for themselves or 6 for their family members, or get it for gifts for other people? How does one get that?
Sure. I guess there's 2 pathways. You know, the shop exists on worxprinting.coop. So at shop.worxprinting.coop, you can click on our swag shop list and pick out the Northwest Cooperative Development Corporation swag shop, and you can get the mug there.
Well, I need to stop you a minute. That's www.shop, S-H-O-P, .workprinting, W-O-R-X, printing.coop.
Correct.
Okay. Keep going.
And there's also a link directly on the Northwest Cooperative Development website, which is nwcdc.coop. And that link's in the About Us section. That will link you directly to the mug without having to circumnavigate through our shop, all of our shops.
So that's northwestcdc.coop.
Yes, nwcdc.coop.
I say it again.
nwcdc.coop.
Okay. In North W West Cooperation Development Center. nwcdc.coop is a way that you can go get that mug. Okay. Matthew, Kevin had asked you to elaborate on benefits of co-ops.
Yeah, and such a great question. I mean, so some of I think the more like well-documented effects of co-ops in communities are oftentimes like civic engagement itself. And, what I mean by that is that, like, becoming involved in the local co-op, I can just orient it around my personal story. Being able to participate in the co-op is a way to sort of practice democracy like a muscle, right? It's a muscle like any other. And so when you get involved in the co-op, oftentimes what happens is that, members experience for the first time what it actually means to try to solve a community problem together. And what that ends up, I think, showing to people is that, it's not easy, first of all. There's a lot of potentially emotional, financial tensions that come up. I certainly saw that over and over again in the startup space of trying to create new co-ops. People don't necessarily work that muscle that frequently necessarily of how do you do conflict resolution? How do you create a budget with your neighbors, to try to solve a problem and create a business? So, and when I say civic participation, I also am thinking about, in the political sense too, because oftentimes, people will find that if they become maybe a board member of their local food co-op, it doesn't become that much of a stretch necessarily to think well, what if I ran for public office? So a lot of times people then kind of engage on multiple different fronts and get just more plugged into their communities. And I think, too, one of the ways that I often talk about this is in, this sometimes called the loneliness pandemic. It's kind of a lesser known pandemic, which is that we actually have a big loneliness problem here in the United States, where people are becoming more isolated over time. There's a great film out actually on Netflix now called Join or Die. And that's a documentary that kind of explores some of those dynamics. And we need to get people more engaged. So co-ops do that really well.
So we're going to take our first break now. We've been talking about this mug that you can go buy it at nwcdc.coop. And we're going to come back after the break and talk more about the benefits of co-ops and different ways you can buy co-op products and services over this holiday period. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
News Talk 1450 WOLAM.
Welcome back, everybody. The program is Everything Co-op, and we have Kevin O'Brien and Matthew Epperson with us today. Been having interesting conversations. Kevin told us about Ben and Jerry and the whole episode there, and how Ben started working in the apparel manufacturer to do union co-ops to create manufacturing there. And this cup, you can get this cup that says there's a co-op for that. You can get that cup. You can get a T-shirt with that saying on it. You can get a bag, a tote bag, by going to northwestcdc.coop, and that's nwcdc.coop. And when you get on there, click on About Us in their main menu, and that will take you to their page on Worx Printing, Worx Printing. And this cup costs $29.99. If I'd have had time, Kevin, I would have ordered mine during the break. I didn't have enough time. They brought us back on. I was wanting to do that. I like the cup. I'm like Matthew. I like a little bit bigger than an 8-ounce. When I do my tea, I used to do coffee, but I like that cup. It looks good. Okay, Matthew, you were talking about the benefits, and you hit the conversation about democracy, and that's working democracy, and that's the co-op are democratic organizations. We talked about P6. P1 is a co-op that's open to anybody, regardless of gender or race or political affiliation or religion. They're just open. If it's being operated as a co-op, that principle one is it's just open. And is it two that is democratic control? One member,
right.
One vote? The second principle? So that's the one you started out with. And when people learn how to work in democracy, then they'll go out and perhaps run for city council or on the board of education. They just find other places that they can use this democracy. They understand it by working in it. Okay, that's one of the that's a huge benefit. What are some of the other benefits of co-ops?
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely, accrue at the community level as well. So I think it's a pretty well documented phenomenon about this idea of like how local dollars circulate in communities. And oftentimes, to some of what Kevin was saying about the history of, how these industries have changed, more and more of those dollars, sometimes leak out. We sometimes say like leaking out of the bucket. But when you spend your dollars with the co-op, I actually just pulled this up quickly because I wanted to mention this. So, in the grocery co-op space, for example, it was found that, for every $1,000 that was spent at a food co-op, $1,600 was generated in the local economy. So bring that down to a single dollar, a dollar becomes $1.60 every time you spend a dollar at the local food co-op. So that's just also another example that I think of how communities become stronger too, because we can pool our resources more effectively, and we can hopefully help to create more of that kind of like cooperative economy by doing things like the Principle 6, like when we support other co-ops with our purchasing decisions. We keep those dollars locally, and we keep strong communities. So I think that's another kind of key benefit.
It is, but let me speak to that a minute, because when I took economics in school, they talked about the multiplier effect. I didn't understand it. I didn't get it until I started looking at this co-op world. But they talk about in the black community, money may turn one time. It basically, somebody goes out and work, they bring the money home, maybe, and then they go outside the community to shop, whether that's, buying clothes, buying food, buying a car, whatever they need to do, it's outside the community. Where in a white community, it turns 5 or 6 times. And so every time that money turns, then there's profit being made. It only turns one time in the black community and 5 or 6 times. But in Black Wall Street in Tulsa, the money turned 32 times. And that's why Tulsa got to be so successful so fast. The money stayed in the community. Whether or not you want to get your horseshoed at the time, okay, or hair done, or hotel rooms, or buying food, it was all done in that community. And so they could get wealth, they could create wealth themselves. So yeah, that's extremely important, and that's what happens in a co-op, whether it's a food co-op or a worker co-op, a housing co-op. That money stays in that community, and it turns, hopefully, 3 to 10 times. The more it turns, the more profit is made in that community. Okay. What's another one? You have another?
Well, yeah, I was just going to shout out Jessica Gordon Emhart's amazing book. I'm sure she's been on the show before, but yeah, Collective Courage tells that story so well. I think about Black Wall Street and the connection specifically to cooperatives. So yeah, I just want to also mention that. For other benefits that co-ops offer in communities, I mean, I often think about like health benefits too. I think it's maybe a little bit there actually are like health benefits to getting involved in your local community. So communities actually become like more physically resilient too, by the process of getting more engaged.
Come on, Matthew, I'm not getting this. You're telling me that if I join a co-op, I'm going to be healthier, physically healthier, I won't be as sick? Is that what you're saying?
Statistically. So not that just when you walk in the door, but yeah, for all the reasons we've been talking about. I mean, if you join the food co-op, then of course you're starting to potentially purchase items that are also like more locally produced. It becomes so much easier to do the things that help your body out by shopping at the local food co-op, for example. That's one example. Hey, I'm also a big fan of reducing stress in your life. Why not shop with the credit union when you're looking for that next car loan? If you're paying less on your interest, that's less stressful. So let's make our lives easier, right?
So I was joking with you when you said that. I'm glad you said it, because most people don't think about the physical health. And then you went to stress, which is mental health. And I talk on this air about the determinants of health. And having money is a huge determinant, because you're less stressed out. You can get the things you need, like health care. But also, housing is a huge determinant of health. And then what I find is a determinant for mental health is having a say in your life. And that's what you get in a co-op. You have a say of how the co-op runs, how do you work in that co-op. And Kevin, I've got to believe that when Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry, when he started looking at Mondragon, which is a co-op conglomerate that he could see some of these health benefits for people. And I got a sense from Ben and Jerry that was when they took a salary that's no more than 6 times the lowest paid salary. That's what they're also concerned about, is spreading that wealth so more and more people have health. You have any sense of that, Kevin? Since you work directly with Ben, right?
I did on the SweatX project, and sadly, the SweatX project didn't last very long. It had a burn of capital. I think there was a couple $1 million pumped into it, which was from the benefit of the sale of Ben and Jerry's. But it really only lasted about 3 years before I had the unenviable task of closing the facility and liquidating the assets, and then sitting with the 40 wonderful workers who were all high profile in their own manner, and explaining to them why this beautiful idea that had so much support had to end. And then I actually ended up doing kind of a college circuit. There were lots of academics who were very interested in better understanding why it didn't work. And yeah, I think it's pretty obvious to me. I locked the door at SweatX in April of 2004. In May of 2004, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives was founded. And it was, I believe, in response to this very public message that Ben brought to the world, that brought to all of us. It was hard to live in the U.S. at the time and not hear the story of how a good business person was going to change the business model to compete with globalization. And the U.S. Federation, to me, represents the building out of the network of support organizations for a worker cooperative. We've talked about quite a few different types of cooperatives thus far, and grocery cooperatives are much more established in the U.S. There are a lot more of them. They're a lot more localized. Food is a very central component to communities, and other cooperatives have had great success in the U.S. Consumer cooperatives like REI, and producer cooperatives like Sun-Made Raisins or Sunbeam Bread, and worker cooperatives, although they have an incredible prehistory to industrialization. In the late 1800s, there were thousands of worker cooperatives. The more traditional corporate structures replaced them, and it really has only been after the New Deal and the success of labor unions in the U.S. This massive globalization effort has kind of shaken us all out of our collective stupor on whether or not corporations are going to actually help us live better lives, and I think we all know that now. SweatX was kind of the canary in the coal mine. It was the first entity to try to mimic this Mondragon-style cooperative in the U.S. in the modern era. And I would say that it failed, not because it was a union, not because it was a cooperative, but it didn't have a cooperative community to support it. And it didn't have all the wonderful organizations that now exist 20 years later, that are here specifically to help make a cooperative for that, to help bring into the world, bring into our lives cooperatives that can help fix these social ills. And I think Matthew mentioned earlier, Cooperation Works is a wonderful kind of parent entity to a lot of the development centers, like Matthew's in Georgia and John's in the Northwest, and we have them in the Northeast, and they're all over the U.S. They're all thriving, not in just helping you start a producer cooperative or a grocery cooperative or an energy cooperative, but but in starting a worker cooperative. And I think maybe, a better understanding of what the differences are between these cooperatives, but what the similarities are. It's going to take more people with more great ideas. We always call it like entrepreneurialism, or, the entrepreneur is supposed to get rich because they have a great idea and they can take it to market and they can build a business they can sell. But I think we're finally ready in this modern era to use that entrepreneurial spirit to do better, to do better for all of us collectively, to build better infrastructure for us. And I think that's the essence of the message of the mug. There's a co-op for that. So
bring it back. Okay. So we've talked about the different co-ops, and I have come down to 4 types of co-ops, 4 co-op sectors. So let me give that real quick. And the first one is, the first 2 depend on who owns and controls the business. So when the business is owned and controlled by the employees, it's called a worker co-op. Okay. And therefore you can have any business you can think of to be a worker co-op.
Yep.
There's a co-op for that. There's a worker co-op for any kind of business you want. I have heard people say that once you get past 500 employees, worker co-ops are difficult. I don't buy that. I don't believe that. I think it is manageable. Mondragon is a great example. There's a 1,500 worker co-op, home care worker co-op in New York, I think the Bronx. So you can manage, and part of the reason is because everybody has a say at some level. The second one is a consumer co-op. And a consumer co-op are owned by the people that shop in the place. And they own and control it. Food co-ops started that way as consumer co-ops. The people that shopped in the market, they are the ones that own it. And in the example that Matthew had, they owned it, and they also, in some cases, the bylaw says they have to work there 4 hours a week or a month or something. But there may be some ways that the consumer would be also in there working. Then there's a credit union, is a consumer co-op. Most people that are in credit unions don't know they're in a co-op. And somebody mentioned you can go in and get, I think it was Matthew, you can go in and get your car loan at the credit union. You may be at 2.5%, where you might be 9% out in the market. So it makes it easier. And credit unions will also teach you about financial control. They do a lot of training to the consumer to understand finances and how to stay out of trouble and have better mental health, less stress. Okay, rural electrics, they're consumer co-ops. There's 600 co-ops in the U.S. There's some large number of rural electrics. And they manage, their rural electrics have about 75% of land mass in the U.S. are electricity for the people that live in these rural areas. And it was created because at the time in the 30s, the large companies would not go because it cost too much to run the lines because the houses were too far apart. So the government loaned folks money to create these rural electrics, and then they did it. They went and did it, and then they paid back the government their money. So it's been extremely beneficial. REI is a consumer co-op. Housing co-ops are consumer co-ops, and they're run by and owned by the people that live in the housing co-op. Then the other 2 types are marketing and purchasing. And I have marketing/producer co-ops. But it's when a group of people or a group of businesses come together to form a business. And that business is to market their products. A group of farmers, cow farmers, come together and form a business that will market their milk. And if they're a producer co-op, they will take that milk and make cheese and cottage cheese and all these different kind of things. They produce other stuff, and they sell it to markets that the farmer couldn't sell it to. Cabot Creamery, Land O'Lakes.
Yep.
But what are some other ones in that area? Marketing producer co-ops.
Organic Valley, Tillamook. Actually, some pretty recognizable brands. Yep.
Yep. And then, but most people won't know that they're co-ops. Ocean Spray. I used to drink gobs of it.
Blue Diamond Almonds. Yeah, there's so many big names. Yeah.
And then you have the purchasing co-ops, and it's, again, a group of people or a group of businesses come together, and farmers have been using this for a long time. They come together, form a business to buy the seed or fertilizer or whatever they need to produce whatever they're going to produce. It's called a purchasing co-op. And it's also the equipment if they need tractors. And in some of these purchasing co-ops, that tractor may be on loan to the smaller farmers or some that may not, everybody doesn't have to own a tractor. So that's a purchasing co-op. And there's one in D.C. called Consumer Purchasing Alliance, and they have a product on this service on this holiday list. But Consumer Purchasing Alliance has been doing well, and now they're stretching out. There is one in Boston, and there's a couple others moving around outside of D.C. So any business, any problem you have, you can start a co-op to solve that problem. Yep, there's a co-op for that. Yep. Kevin, did you start to say something, Matthew?
Oh, I was just going to say, Vernon, that's one of the reasons that I'm so actually excited about consumer co-ops in particular, because I say this a bit tongue in cheek, but I sometimes call them gateway co-ops, because they're a lot of times like the first touch point for people to ever even hear about any of these things. So, for example, like when I was working in the grocery co-op space, I made a point with our merchandising, that we actually took that symbol from the International Cooperative Alliance, the co-op, with the kind of the double interlinking rings of the O's. I put that right on the shelves underneath all the products that we sold in our store that were made by co-ops. So that was like my little P6 contribution there to just help our customers have that first touch point of oh, what is that? This was made by a co-op. What does that mean? Because consumer co-ops have such a huge reach. I mean, you mentioned REI, for example. It's the biggest consumer co-op in the country. They have, I can't remember how many members, but maybe it's, thousands. This is just such a great entry point for folks to get to understand all these concepts. So I really appreciate, how consumer co-ops get to be these gateways for folks. So I was just going to mention that.
Well, I think it could be a much bigger gateway, particularly credit unions. Credit unions,
right.
There are millions and millions of people belong to credit unions. And every time there's a downturn, there's an increase in the number of people who go to credit unions because they're there to help people through hard times. That's okay. They help people through all times, but particularly through hard times. Kevin, back to Worx Printing, Worx Printing. So what are some of the positives that you have found in creating printing for all of these different co-ops?
Well, I have to say that, my favorite part of helping anyone with merchandise is all the merchandise we produce and we're talking about here, tote bags, t-shirts, hats, mugs, are very personal items. And we live in a world of, hyper advertising and hyper marketing. And I forget what the number of impressions are that the average person sees, when they leave their home for a day. How many advertising impressions of a logo, of an idea, of something someone's trying to get you to buy. But it's overwhelming. And humans can only take so much of it before they shut it off. The most intimate form of expression of an idea is when you're talking to another human being and they've chosen to use their body or their immediate space with the mug that they're holding or the shirt that they're wearing, and that message. And when you connect on a one-to-one level, that impression is the strongest impression you can make on someone. And being able to help, thousands, or at this point, tens of thousands of organizations get their unique messages out into their communities so that they can make these impressions on others is incredibly satisfying. We kind of put it in the bucket of visibility. We help organizations increase their visibility in the world. And I think that's important for every organization, that they have that ability to increase their visibility in their community. And then the other bucket is fundraising. And, when done in a transparent manner, profit is not an ugly word. Profit is a wonderful word. And in fact, Mondragon would say profit helps you exercise your values in this world. So that's the other part that I love, is that we're able to help these organizations produce a profit that goes directly back into their organizing efforts, into their advertising efforts, into their community work efforts. And that's what our cooperative provides to organizations working in this social and solidarity economy is a unique way of having a shop where there's really very little risk and a lot of reward to be able to take a message to market like this. So
I just want to speak real quick to profit. Somebody mentioned it already. Most capitalistic, and this is what I learned in the MBA program, capitalistic companies are interested in three things: profit, profit, and profit. Where co-ops are interested in three things. It starts with a P, but it's first people, then the planet, then profit. Profit is very important. It's extremely important. But people and planet come first. And that's the reason in terms of values that I like co-ops over capitalistic models. So, which one of you would like to tell the audience, what message would you like to leave the audience with?
Kevin, you want to do the honors?
Sure. I mean, let's face it, we're here as three supporting players to the star of the show, which is this mug that Matthew nominated for this holiday season. And that mug, it makes an impression and it leaves an impression that there's a cooperative for that. And I hope that all your listeners know, in these trying times, when we might all feel a little bit helpless, a little bit like democracy is failing us, that political democracy is only one part of democracy. And we can live every day in a truly democratic community if we choose to. And John McNamara and Northwest Cooperative Development say it best when they say there's a cooperative for that. So if you want to make change in the world, check out Cooperation Works. Check out all these wonderful organizations and help bring more cooperatives into the world.
There's a cooperative for that. And we'll see you next Thursday. Please live cooperatively.
The preceding program was paid for by Everything Co-op.